Hey guys, it's Selwen here, the Arcane Mage. Arcane has always been the runt of the litter of the mages for the past years in terms of being the go-to spec. If it's with reason or not will end up being subjective on what you find to be fun to play, and the majority might say that Arcane could do with some more added flavor. In terms of numbers, was never all that impressive until now. Now, Arcane does excel in single target damage, in particular burst. If it's allowed to just stand still and act as a turret, you can deal pretty absurd amount of damage whilst pretty much clicking one button, Arcane Blast. With that, however, comes the small complexities of Arcane. The only ranged DPS spec where mana is still part of its gameplay. Most of your spells here use mana to some extent that, in combination with your second resource, the 4 arcane charges, will allow your Arcane Blast to deal more damage per charge, but in turn rapidly consume your mana, making the rotation of Arcane into a cyclic manner, the burn phase and the conserve mana phase. That will happen depending on your cooldowns and your mana. But before going into that, let's talk them talents. The Arcane Mage talents are still very much divided into the single target and multi-target choices, which is a bit of a shame, as in dungeons can worsen your experience when going from trash to bosses and vice versa, depending on what path you chose to take. So on the first tier we get rule of threes. Every time you reach the 3rd arcane charge, your next Arcane Blast or Arcane Missiles is free of mana. In general, this will give you a free Arcane Blast, which is great for single target. In AoE can work as well, at least when there's about 3 to 4 targets, getting you to the 4 charges to put out an Arcane Barrage. More on that later. Arcane Familiar will be an easier choice, at least in AoE. It's a sort of pet that will increase your overall mana by 10%. That will equal more spells to be cast in the end. AoE, be sure to take this if you're not gonna make use of that free Arcane Blast from rule of threes. In single target you can take it as well, but rule of threes pulls ahead. Amplification will add an extra missile to your Arcane Missiles, but currently weaker than the other 2 choices. Next we get our mobility. The classic shimmer is always great for that extra blink, and usable while casting, say an Arcane Blast, evocation or even missiles. That said, if you prefer, Slipstream can be equally good or better in certain circumstances, allowing you to cast Arcane Missiles on the clear casting proc or evocation while moving. This will allow a lot more freedom in your casts, although Arcane Blasts might suffer a little bit, but evocation while moving really is a godsend in some fights, so take what you prefer. Mana Shield is decent for more survivability with your barrier, but in PvE I really don't recommend for you to take that. Next, Rune of Power is practically a must here, a rune that you place on the ground, increasing your overall spell damage by 40%. Taking into account that your damage and burst is very controllable in its nature, with no RNG or unpredictability, you can plan around it perfectly with your Rune of Power. That said, it comes with a con of restricting you to its area, and the bad placement or use, like just before some boss mechanic, can take a huge toll on your overall DPS. So if you don't feel comfortable or the fight doesn't really allow, Incanter's Flow will be here for you, just passively increasing your damage 5% to 20%, decreasing and increasing over time. A safe bet, essentially, especially in dungeons. Mirror's Image is far too weak at this point in time to take. On the next tier, there's Charged Up, a small cooldown where it will instantly provide you with 4 arcane charges. What this will allow is for better openers, as you can essentially skip the step of getting to the 4 charges and instead go straight to the burn phase, an extremely valuable addition to single target. In AoE, like in dungeons, it works for extra barrages. That said, Resonance will be better to cleave and AoE, increasing your Arcane Barrage damage by 10% for each target hit. This is amazing for dungeons, however, not having Charged Up on bosses can suck a little bit. Supernova is alright, the damage provided is lower than these other 2 options, but it does have a CC component, which can serve as a secondary interrupt if you so wish. Next is whatever you prefer. Chrono Shift tends to be best by giving your Arcane Barrage slow and give you a slight movement speed buff. And on the following tier, Reverberate will give your Arcane Explosion a 40% chance to give you an extra Arcane charge if it hits 3 targets or more, so an amazing choice for dungeons in combination with Resonance. More on this in the rotation bit. Touch of the Magi will be a single target option. Your Arcane Blast has a 10% chance to apply a debuff where it will pull 15% of all the damage that you do, and after those 8 seconds it explodes, dealing the damage all around based on what's soaked. Another Tempest can work for anything. It's another debuff that you place on a target for 12 seconds, dealing damage depending on Arcane charges, AoEing all around, so for dungeons can work nicely as well, just not as bursty as Reverberate, and for single target even comes close to Touch of the Magi, making it a jack of all trades, a type of ability comparing to the other choices. That said, it adds another button for you to click, so if that's not your thing, you can take the others for an easier playstyle, and as a side tip, always place it on the highest HP target to minimize reapplications. And then on the last tier we get Overpowered, a simple talent, just vastly improving your Arcane power. This is technically the best single target option to make those burn/burst phases even better. Time Anomaly is arguably more fun and comes close, far more RNG reliant, however. At any moment you can get Arcane power to pop for 8 seconds, Evocation for 1, or get free 4 charges. Now this can be really good and fun in some situations, like giving you free mana during your burn phase. However, the timing of it isn't always that great, like getting Evocation to pop near max mana. That said, if you really like it, you can take it. It isn't a huge DPS loss in comparison to Overpowered. As for Arcane Orb, is the more AoE centric option, so best for dungeons. If you played Frost Mage, it's basically like Frozen Orb, although it just travels and slices through enemies, so make sure to aim it properly and not pull the whole room, and disappears after it travels those 40 yards, granting you Arcane charges per target hit, which then you can use for more barrages. What's interesting about the Arcane talent tree in general is that you do get to pick talents which gives you that very basic 1 to 2 button rotation, but if I start picking all the active talent choices, you'll be put in a situation where you can have up to 4 or 5 buttons to click at any given point, making it a little bit more interesting. Now, with all of that said, let's talk rotation and your spells. First of all, before going into those different phases, the burn phase and the conserve mana phase, let's talk about the main idea when playing Arcane. So mana in Arcane is actually improved from your mastery, and most of what you do is all based around your mana bar, so getting a decent weak aura will be something that you want to do to just keep tabs on it. If you don't mind, check down below in the description. Arcane Blast is going to be your biggest consumer of mana, but also your highest damaging ability. Each cast will add an Arcane charge, plus increasing its cast time per charge, giving it a bit more weight. At first, damage and mana are both quite low, but as you keep casting and those charges ramp up, mana consumption is going to double per charge, and damage at around 70%, depending on your mastery percentage as well. Once you are at max, you're going to deal quite a lot of damage, but it's literally taking chunks of your mana. Now, in your burn phase, this is something you want to abuse with your cooldowns, just to deal a lot of burst damage, especially if you can just stand still while doing it. More on that in a bit. Now, as you spend mana, you might also get procs called clear casting. What they will do is make both Arcane Explosion and Arcane Missiles free of mana and channel faster. This will be the only time you're gonna be using the missiles. You get the proc, and as long as you're not close to your mana cap, use it. Although there are some exceptions, such as in your burn phase. Again, more on that in a bit. All of that said, being at full charges is all fun and games for Arcane Blast, but there will be times, such as your conserve mana phase, that you're gonna need to control your mana. The way to manage that will be your Arcane barrages. They are free of mana, but consume all of your Arcane charges in order to deal damage. This set damage is increased per charge and mastery, plus hits an additional target per charge as well, and it will be your main way to deal damage in AoE. Once again, more on that later. With those basic concepts in mind, let's talk about those phases, starting with the burn phase, which also happens to be your opener. Now, there are some set rules about entering the burn phase, which is 1. Arcane Power and Rune of Power are off cooldown, you add 4 charges, and you have at least half of your mana up, and Evocation is either near or off cooldown. Since this is an opener, you for sure have the mana part covered and your cooldowns. And for the Arcane charges, you want to get the first 4 before popping your other CDs. So this is where your charged up cooldown will come in, immediately giving you those 4 charges. If you're not playing with charged up, you would simply have to cast 4 Arcane Blasts without cooldowns or anything. You can precast one obviously before the pull. Now that you are at 4 is when you want to pop your other 2 CDs so you can actually enter the burn phase, Rune of Power and Arcane Power. So you would go for Rune first as it has a cast time, and at the end of the cast you go for Arcane Power, just so their timers align perfectly. In the middle of this, you can also pop your Presence of Mind, since it's out of a global cooldown, making your next 2 Arcane Blasts instant casts, just to completely maximize those CDs uptime. Although this is not a must, you can reserve that Presence of Mind for movement later on in the fight, but now you are all properly set up to go into the burn phase. And here is all and literally all about Arcane Blast spam. For the remainder of the Arcane Power duration, that's all that you're gonna do. If you get clear casting procs, they don't matter here, just keep burning away that mana and in turn doing a lot of burst DPS. The reason why you don't want to use your missiles here is because Arcane Power not only increases your overall damage but reduces mana cost, so using a free costing spell is simply not worth it. Once Arcane Power and Rune of Power end, you pop your second charge of Rune of Power and keep doing that Arcane Blast spam until you completely empty of mana. Although this time you can use those free missile procs as you get them, since Arcane Power is no longer up. So the idea with the burn phase is basically in the name, is to burn away all of your mana while doing as much DPS as possible with your CDs, an Arcane Blast spam, plus any sort of racial or trinket that you might have. Now obviously this isn't a perfect world type of situation. At times mechanics might move you away from your Rune of Power and etc, so you simply gonna have to adapt to such encounters. Now once you empty, you can finish off with a barrage, if you have a charged up talent that is, and then pop your Evocation to get all of your mana back and enter the conserve mana phase. The conserve mana phase will involve the hardest part of the arcane rotation, before even a toddler could perform decently, but now is when you're gonna have to actually manage your mana with your abilities, so you can still do fair enough damage until Arcane Power comes off cooldown to enter the next burn phase. How you're gonna do that? Well, it's all gonna be about Arcane Blast and barrages. If you use that barrage at the end of the burn phase, you can go for a charged up again to get back to the 4 charges. And here there's really no set hard rules for you to follow. You generally want to get to the 4 arcane charges, use 2 or so Arcane Blasts, then barrage to clean them and build them back up, while at the same time you use your missiles procs as they are free of mana. The goal here is to slowly use your mana while still doing as much damage as you can. As long as you don't drop below 50% of your mana, it's gonna be fine. So you're gonna build and cast those Arcane Blasts just like before, but don't spam them as much. Look out for your mana. If you're going dangerously close to 50%, do your barrage and then rinse and repeat, slowly and smoothly, just making sure your Arcane Power cooldown comes back up. You will still be at 50% or above mana. If you're feeling a bit more comfortable with your Arcane Mage and you have overpowered Talented, you can go as far as 35%, but take caution to not burn all of your mana away. Now, should you use your other cooldowns during this phase? Well, Presence of Mind has the 2 uses that I said before, one to squeeze those extra blasts during the burn phase, or to be used during movements. So if you really need it for movement and such, you can use it in the conserve mana phase also. A charged up is just a way to get to the 4 charges instantly. The cooldown is relatively short, so you can use it just like I did in the beginning, in preparation for a burn phase, but in between you can use it just as a way to squeeze in an extra barrage, like I did before entering entering the conserve mana phase. As for the Rune of Power, they are most valuable during the burn phase obviously, so make sure you have it available there, but if you're nearing the 2 charges whilst still in the conserve mana phase, sure, be free to use it. You don't want that cooldown to just sit there at max, as long as you will be able to stand still to cast during its uptime. So be aware of your surroundings and mechanics going on before popping your Rune of Power. That's the foremost rule on Rune of Power itself, both in the burn or conserve mana phase. Now, when you know the conserve mana phase is finished is when you see that Arcane Power is going to be ready to go again soon. Once ready, do the same as your opener or burn phase. Rune of Power first, then Arcane Power, and Arcane Blast spam during it. Once it ends, go back to the spam but using the missiles procs until empty. Most surely then your evocation is off cooldown, then go back to the conserve phase and just go on in this circle. If you reach the end of the burn phase and you don't have evocation ready, just do the same as you would if you were in the conserve mana phase. Go up to the 4 charges, then dump with barrages and repeat until evocation is ready. You can actually do that indefinitely due to how fast your mana regens. In the end, the most important part of your damage will occur during the burn phase. It's relatively easy, and using your cooldowns properly there will be key. And in mid-fight, the amount of mana available from the conserve phase will be an important factor as well. The other key part of your rotation will be the sad conserve mana phase. It's really unforgiving to mistakes, as you can easily go out of mana if you're not careful, or you might not deal enough damage to remain competitive if you are too careful. So try to find the right balance with the guidelines I just shown you. Now, if you happen to be using other talent choices such as Nether Tempest in single target, you would just want to keep it up, only using it at 4 charges for the maximum damage, and as long as you're not inside Arcane Power window, feel free to use it. As for Arcane Orb, again the same, it's actually pretty good to use during conserve phase since it barely costs any mana. As for using during the burn phase, same idea as Nether Tempest. If with Time Anomaly, not much will change, just adapt to its random buffs, like getting Evocation proc during burn means more burn. Be alert of those 4 charges if you're in the conserve phase, and as for the Arcane Power one, won't change overly much, just put away the missiles while it's up. Now, all of that covered, what about AoE or cleave? Well, if 2 targets are present, nothing will change. Just on the conserve phase you can go for barrages more often due to its cleave nature. On the 3 targets or above though is when your AoE rotation will actually start, and here is when you're gonna replace your Arcane Blasts for Arcane Explosion. They work in similar ways, both generate Arcane charges, however Arcane Explosion damage itself does not increase with them. So the goal with your AoE rotation is pretty much Arcane Explosion to 4 charges. This will be done easier with Reverberate. Once at 4, Arcane Barrage for the most damage. Never use Arcane Explosion at 4, it's useless, so just go for barrages. It's only worth to Arcane Explosion spam on, say, 10 targets or more, so when there's a lot of little mobs. The goal here is to put out as much barrages as possible, essentially. If you with a rule of 3s, try to use that Arcane Blast at, well, 3 charges instead of the explosion. In terms of cooldowns and phases, yes, it kind of falls into the sort of same idea. You can technically pop 1 Rune of Power or just Arcane Power and burn all of your mana, although the way Arcane Explosion works now is no longer an apples to apples comparison with Arcane Blast, and you're gonna use Arcane Power just as a way to boost your AoE, but mostly for barrages. As for other abilities, Nether Tempest, keep it always up, obviously on the highest HP or strongest mob, for the same reasons I said it earlier, only using it at 4 charges. As for Arcane Orb, also use it on cooldown, but remember to be empty of charges as it grants them. This will equal extra barrages. The same follows if you have a charged up spect. Once again, it's all about maximizing them barrages and charges to AoE. Arcane Explosion is just a filler, and thankfully clear casting works with it. In terms of movement, it hurts Arcane a little bit. Your shimmers and displacements help a ton, or a slipstream, but the biggest problem will be constant movement, since there's no way to do Arcane Blasts. So remember presence of mind to alleviate this issue, especially since Runes of Power can also make movement a huge pain. And that covers your rotation. As for Azurite traits, Galvanizing Spark is currently a really great one, granting your Arcane Blast a chance to give you 2 charges instead of 1, so look out for those extra ones. As for other best traits, you can check on the screen which are the currently best ones, but none will change your rotation at all. If you want a more accurate list, check down in the description along with other great goodies. As for stats, as always, Intellect is the king, so take item level above anything. After that, crits and haste are usually pretty precious, but as with everything surrounding stats, Siming will be the way to go. In the description you can also find a way on how to do that. And yeah, that covers it all. As always, thank you for watching. Remember to like and subscribe to get more videos like this, and check out my Patreon if you wish to support the channel. Have a fantastic day everyone, and I'll see you all next time. See ya!